Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's event entitled The Way Ahead on Debt, Reform, Resilience, and Leadership in a Fragmented World. My name is Maria Fernanda Espinosa. I'm the Executive Director of GWL Voices, former President of the UN General Assembly, and co-chair of the Debt Relief for Green and Inclusive Recovery Project, which of course is organizing this event. As we are aware, debt sustainability has once again become a central thought line in the global economy. Rising interest rates, slowing growth, repeated climate shocks, and an increasingly fragmented geoeconomic landscape are putting renewed pressure on many countries, particularly across the so-called global south countries. At the same time, geopolitical tensions, diverging creditor interests, and weakened multilateral cooperation have made these coordinated solutions more difficult, even as the need for action become more urgent. Yet this moment is also marked by important shifts. Borrower countries are more coordinated and assertive, placing debt firmly on the agenda of global debates, from the G20 and the financing for development process to climate negotiations. And there is growing recognition that debt relief, development finance, and climate action can no longer be treated in isolation. So it is against this backdrop that today's webinar looks ahead to the next phase of global debt reform as we move toward COP31 and a new cycle of G20 and G7 discussions. We will explore today what is politically and economically feasible in the short and medium term, and where innovative and non-traditional approaches may be needed to break current deadlocks and translate momentum into delivery. We will also reflect on the role of emerging and more inclusive spaces, particularly within the United Nations, and the follow-up to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville last year. This event, and I say this with a heavy heart, has a special significance. We are gathering today to honor the legacy of Shamshad Akhtar, founding co-chair of the DRGR project, a distinguished development economist and global public servant. I think her leadership and lived experience profoundly shaped international debates on debt, development, and economic justice. She was a dear friend and an emeritus now member of GWL Voices. So let me briefly outline the structure of the session. We will begin with opening reflections in honor of Shamshad Akhtar by Professor Heinrich-Böll, followed by a panel discussion with our distinguished speakers today. We have a dream panel today. And after the panel, we will open the floor for audience questions. So we warmly encourage your participation. Please do use the Q&A function to submit your questions for the panelists at any point during the discussion. You can also like and vote questions up. We will do, of course, our best to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A segment towards the end of the session after we have heard all our panelists. With that, it is my pleasure to hand over to Professor Heinrich-Böll, Professor of Economics and Director of the Center for Sustainable Finance at SOAS, University of London, and a colleague and co-chair of the DRGR project. So you will share, dear Uli, a few reflections with us on Shamshad Akhtar's legacy. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, dear Maria Fernanda, and also hello from my side, and many thanks for joining this event today, everyone. when we decided to have this event on the way forward on debt, we not only felt that it was an opportune time to have a discussion on the topic, because the sovereign debt crisis that is really threatening developing across a large number of developing countries is not going away, and there's far too little that's been done to solve it. But we also did very much feel that would be a good opportunity to honor our friend Shamshad Akhtar, who very surprisingly, unexpectedly passed away far too early on 27th of December. And as Maria Fernanda mentioned, Shamshad was a co-chair, the founding co-chair of this Debt Relief for Green Inclusive Recovery project, where she was very passionate about this topic. She really felt this is the key issue of the time, and so she brought in her very extensive expertise, her strategic insight, and an unwavering commitment to really shape not only this initiative but also try to move the needle and address this debt topic. And I just want to say a few things on her career. I mean, it's impressive. She was a real trailblazer, both at the national level. She was the first female governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. She served as finance minister, caretaker finance minister of her home country, Pakistan, twice. But she also had a very distinguished career in international organizations, holding very senior positions with the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, the United Nations, where among others she also served as executive secretary of the United Nations Economic Social Commission for Asia Pacific. She played an instrumental role in shaping the Sustainable Development Agenda. She's been deeply involved in financing for development agenda over the decades, and she really left a huge mark, not just on the people she's worked with, but also on global development policy. And it's been an incredible privilege to work with her and also to call her a friend. She had very profound knowledge on global development more broadly, but of course fiscal policy, financial policies, and debt policies. And so she was really helping very much to shape our approach. She was always ready to call on people like Kristalina Georgieva or other senior leaders to engage in on discussion on the debt crisis. And yeah, I mean, just one day actually before she passed away, she dropped me a message asking for what are we doing next. She was always like very keen to really move the topic forward and so I'm still very much shocked that she's not with us anymore. The last time I saw her, she was so energetic. That was actually in Tokyo, where she gave a keynote speech at a conference on fiscal policy and climate change that we had organized. The SOA Center for Sustainable Finance had organized together with the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank Institute. And she gave an excellent keynote speech where she spoke on the nexus, which is so central to this Debt Relief for Green Inclusive Recovery project, the nexus between debt, climate, and development, and how this vicious circle is really harming so many countries now, and basically justifying why we really need to talk about debt relief in many countries. And this is why I'm also glad that we can have now a discussion with wonderful friends and colleagues, all of whom I think have also worked a lot, partly with her over the years, to discuss solutions. And as Maria Fernanda said, these are very difficult times for international cooperation. And when we started the project in 2020 to put forward a grand vision for debt relief, linking it to ambitious action on the SDGs and climate. It was very ambitious and audacious already then, and we knew that we would not only encounter open doors, but we very much felt we need to push this. And it's great how much these ideas that we've been pushing have really made it into the mainstream. But we also do know that at a time when we really need more multilateral cooperation, it's very difficult. So it's great to have all these wonderful colleagues here to discuss how, in this difficult time, we can move this important agenda forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Uli. And you are so right. Shamshad was really an outstanding person on a personal and a professional level. So much energy, so much intellect to the service of the common good, I have to say. And as you said, she believed profoundly in the need for a debt relief initiative to basically allow debt-stricken countries to recover and thrive again. So it would have been, I'm sure, in her interest not only to mourn her, but to continue the discussion, the commitment, the work in a very much in a forward-looking way. And that's why we have the panel that we have, such a high-level panel. It's an extraordinary group of people. So let me very quickly introduce our speakers, who I would, of course, encourage to turn on their cameras with us. And so we have Dr. Kevin Gallagher, Professor of Global Development Policy and Director of the Boston University Global Development Policy. So welcome, Kevin. We have also Dr. Stephanie Griffith-Jones, Professor Emeritus at IDS, University of Sussex, and Financial Markets Directors at the Initiative for Policy Dialogue, a former Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Chile. So welcome, Dr. Griffith-Jones. We have with us also Mahmoud Mohyeldin. He is the United Nations Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. He was previously, he had high-level positions at the UN, at the IMF, the World Bank, and of course the Egyptian government. And last but not least, Dr. Penelope Hawkins, Officer in charge of Debt and Development Finance Branch at the UN Trade and Development, UNCTAD. So welcome all. Allow me to start with you, Penelope. Thank you for agreeing to be part of this event. I would start with you. And my question to you is that last year we saw a lot of momentum regarding debt at the fourth FFD conference in Seville. So the task for this year is of course to translate the Sevilla commitments into action. At the UN, of course, we have seen this includes the UN Task Force on Responsible Lending and Borrowing, the Seville Forum on Debt, the Borrowers Platform, and the intergovernmental process to identify gaps in the debt architecture. So it's a long list. It's a huge homework ahead. So could you please tell us, Penelope, where these processes stand and what concrete outcomes we can expect this year in 2026? So you have 5 minutes for all these very important issues. Over to you, Penelope.
Well, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, thank you very much for this introduction and indeed the opportunity to give tribute to Shamshad Akhtar. I think she comes into our story, which I will talk about in a minute. But obviously what we see coming out of Sevilla is an acknowledgement that there are certain things that have either been neglected or that represent obvious gaps in the international financial architecture. Certainly from the perspective of the Borrowers Platform, where I'll start, we know that for some time, people have been acknowledging that there is this institutionalized space for creditors. There have always been so. There are even spaces where creditors and borrowers can talk, but there is no borrower-led space that allows for continuous exchange and a collective voice. And yes, as you say, the Seville Commitment allowed for a borrower's platform to be established. Really, the ideas behind that are to discuss technical issues, share information and experiences, increase access to technical assistance and capacity building, and really for borrowers' voices to be developed in a way that they can, in fact, address some of the concerns with the global debt architecture. You know, I had the privilege of meeting Shamshad Akhtar, and when I met her, the thing that struck me so extraordinarily, because of course, when you meet a powerful person, you're never quite sure how they're going to be. But she was remarkable in that she was prepared to listen to what people had to say. And I think that idea that, you know, listening is important makes us think about what is required for good listening to take place. And it's clearly a space where people have the confidence to have a voice and be heard. And I think this is genuinely what we are hoping the borrowers platform will deliver. It's not a crisis coordination mechanism. That will have to take place elsewhere. It's not a forum for collective renegotiating of debt, but it's really a space where borrower countries, large and small, with different levels of experience, different levels of development, different levels of indebtedness, importantly, and different debt sustainability profiles, can engage in peer learning, share experiences, and advance collective advocacy. Of course, all of this will be in a voluntary and non-binding space, but ultimately, if we think about the role that this can play together with other overarching changes that came out of the Seville Commitment, like the enlivening of the principles on responsible borrowing and lending, we think that the ways in which behavior of both creditors and borrowers can be, shall we say, more in line with creating sustainability, we think that will actually send a positive market signal throughout the environment and ultimately create strengthened debt sustainability practices, improve transparency in borrowing countries, and that's actually a global good for all. And so we are really hoping that this work that we have been doing since Seville, which has really been concentrated since October, in the end of October, a working group have been working to try and develop some draft modalities. 7 member states have been working together with UNCTAD as the secretariat to try and really pull together what would a borrower's platform look like, and how should it go ahead. And what we are really hoping this year is that this is the year that the borrower's platform starts to really take shape. We are hoping there will be a launch announcement at the Springs meetings, the ones coming up here in April, and really to encourage countries, developing countries who are net borrowers, to really be part of this and to support it. We think that there will be opportunities almost immediately for us to undertake technical capacity and peer learning experiences. And we really see that as the driver of the work of the borrowing platform. And so we are really hoping that that is what takes place in the first instance.
Well, thank you, Penelope. And so the good news, the work is going forward. We hear you. And yes, this platform, I think it's would be extremely valuable, as you said, to discuss, exchange experiences for a capacity building. And when you mention deep listening, I think that's what we need to do in the community in the lending community and in the borrowing community, as you said, aligned with sustainability. So very much looking forward to see the of the platform, as you said, as soon as the April meetings in DC. So thank you very much. Let me now turn to Mahmoud. You are with us, huh, Mahmoud? Yeah, I see you. And I turn to you as co-chair of the UN Secretary General's expert group on debt. The group produced a report ahead of last year's UN Financing for Development conference in Seville. So please, we would like you to share with us where you see the most important actions that need to be taken to address the debt crisis. What emerged from the report and what is happening in terms of putting in motion the recommendations. So over to you for 5 minutes, dear Mahmoud, and welcome.
Right. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I appreciate very much the opportunity to share some reflections on this important topic that was very much central in the excellent work and effort by my good sister, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, whom I knew for many years, goes back to the time before the global financial crisis, when she was an official in Pakistan, and had many meetings then when her interest, especially in advancing development finance through financial literacy and financial inclusion. Then she became a vice president of the World Bank, responsible for the MENA region, and I was her main counterpart in Egypt when I was serving government as Minister of Investment, and I was governor to the World Bank. And then we worked together when I joined the World Bank as Managing Director, and she was VP. And then I knew her, of course, through her excellent work in different capacities at the UN. So nothing better than trying to raise the flag of wisdom and providing practical and pragmatic solutions that she always carried with pride and with great consideration to the country-specific circumstances. To your question, Madam Chair, and it's good to come after Penelope. Yes, 11 proposals, and I remember very well when we were starting the work with the rest of the co-chairs, Trevor Manuel, Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni, and Professor Yan Wang. We were guided and advised by the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General of the UN to provide practical solutions to be technically feasible. And there is no worries about that, because we know about a great deal of work for many years of technically feasible proposals and measures. But more important is basically to make sure that these measures are politically plausible or feasible as well. There are many great ideas, but implementing them, especially with the tough geopolitics, we were discussing that when we started, but now that was toward the end of 2024. But finished the work in 2025 before Seville. But you may agree with me that the circumstances are getting much more complicated than the time that we started. But I'm happy to say that even with the recent developments, all of the 11 proposals are feasible to be applied tomorrow. They don't need a great deal of political heavy lifting to deal with. And there are 3 fronts, because we tackled issues related to debt management, debt prevention, and debt crisis efforts as well. You can take it as well from a different perspective, as we put it in the three categories. There are some specific measures related to the engagement at the global multilateral level. And then there are many measures that we can do on bilateral lines of cooperation. And then, as always, it's not what we can really gain from engaging beyond our borders. There are many measures that we have to consider at the national and the local measures. I was happy to say that during discussions that took 2 days at Wilton Park just last week, in discussions with a group of experts, including colleagues who worked with us in the report that you are very familiar with, the Jubilee report led by Professor Stiglitz and Martin Guzman. We're seeing a great deal of alignment. And we're seeing that the argument that we've been putting are informing policies and suggesting improvement in institutions at the national, regional, and global level. Penelope mentioned one of the proposals, which is for us proposal number 7, to establish a borrowers club, and for that borrowers club to work closely with the Debt Forum that our good friends in Spain help us launching, and it should be operational. There was a representative from Spain in that meeting, and she assured us of the good progress in the Debt Forum. Of course, they need to coordinate together, those two entities, because there are lots of common objectives, including the operationalization of the responsible lending and borrowing principles, knowledge sharing, technical assistance. And for the specific case of the Borrowers Club, it's an answer that we have been waiting for more than 40 years, since the attempts in Latin America, in Cartagena, were there, but they never materialized. But in addition to that, we put forward some proposals to improve the common framework for debt treatment, proposals to enhance the capacity of the World Bank and the IMF through specific vehicles to provide financial and technical support to and relief to countries impacted by the debt crisis. There are suggestions as well that I'm happy to see many of us are engaged in advising the IMF and the World Bank in revising their debt sustainability framework. In addition to that, there are some better considerations for how best we use the remaining SDRs that we emphasize as well. I'm happy to say that areas related to technical support and capacity building for and to go beyond transactions in areas related to debt swaps. I was actually in Cairo today discussing this very topic with the Ministry of Planning of Egypt and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because it has now responsibility over international cooperation. So ideas related not just swaps for nature or swaps for climate, but swaps for education have been highlighted. In addition to all of these proposals, we put some specific areas for enhancing the fiscal and monetary policy coordination, improving the debt management offices at the country level, and building a pipeline of bankable, investable projects. Because colleagues and Madam Chair, you know that the problems is not just about having a couple of shocks here and there, and we see the cost of capital rising. It's basically about financing the growth model and sustainable development that needed to be more relying on domestic resource mobilization, on better opportunities for the private sector, and enhancing the opportunities for small and medium enterprises, and improving the regional cooperation. Over to you.
Thank you, Mahmoud. And basically, I thank you for bringing the package and the complexity of the issue. It's not only the borrowers platform, but the 11 recommendations of the report working at the same time, the debt forum that is being led by Spain, but also very happy to know that the discussion on how to improve the common framework and the debt sustainability framework continue to be discussed. What to do with the unused SDRs, how to expand the basket, the discussion on debt swaps, not only for nature and climate, but also for development. All of these is part of the complexity and how big the space for debt relief is. And the bad news is that we need to move in all these fronts at the same time and in parallel to ensure that the countries of the global majority, the highly indebted countries, have some breathing space in the current circumstances. So thank you for what you're doing, not only for the report and the 11 recommendations, but for really keeping the issues at top of the agenda. So I would also like to remind our audience to send us questions using the Q&A function, and let us know to whom you're addressing the question to. And now, without further ado, let me turn to Kevin Gallagher. Kevin, for over 15 years, China has been a vital source of development finance, especially for low and middle income countries worldwide. So, however, we have witnessed in recent years that China has substantially reduced its overseas lending, and it's shifting towards what I would call a more commercial approach. So the Boston University GDP Center has just published a new paper on China and the debt situation. And we would really like to know from you what are the current trends in Chinese lending and what China could do to support countries in the global majority. So over to you, Kevin, and great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, Maria Fernanda. And first and foremost, I just want to also express my sorrow and the sorrow and homage of all of us here at the GDP Center for Shamshad Akhtar. I speak on behalf of everyone here at the GDP Center that had the honor of working with her throughout all of our engagement on DRGR. She just passed away too young. And upon reflection, it's just amazing what she accomplished in such a short period of time. In addition to working with her through DRGR, a number of the people at our center, Mary Lou Wee and Ying Qian, worked with her at the World Bank, at the ADB, at the UN, and they all also expressed their sadness and condolences. But as Maria Fernanda says, it is our responsibility now to carry on her ambition and her legacy. And in that spirit, I'll make three quick points about the China component of this. And it's if you want to go in more depth, we just published a paper called Chinese Development Finance and Debt Crises in the Global South that I just put in the chat. So three quick points, and I'll elaborate on them a little bit. One, as Maria Fernanda indicated, for the past 2 decades, Chinese development finance has filled major gaps in the development finance architecture, and it's provided the most productive and among the most lowest cost of capital in the system. But that finance has slowed significantly since COVID and has turned net negative in recent years. Number two, that China's provided the most debt relief since COVID, both bilaterally and through the Common Framework and the DSSI, and it's been a productive critic of some of the fundamental flaws of the Common Framework. Indeed, part of the reason why China's net flows are now negative is because they were the largest participant in the DSSI, which suspended debt payments, which unfortunately are now due. The third point is that it's in China's interest to recharge its development financing and its bilateral debt relief, as the Common Framework remains a failed experiment that will not be reformed anytime soon, given the retreat from multilateralism in the West that continues to leave the Global South behind. So I'll elaborate on those really quickly and then move on to the next person. But point number one, just to give some context to the point that China has really filled a major gap here with lower cost and more productive financing. So MDB financing has not increased since the 1990s. It's been less than 1% of GDP. And since 2008, China's provided upwards of $500 billion, which is about 70% of what the World Bank did at the same time, and multiples more than the Asian Development Bank. Moreover, it was relatively lower cost. During that same period, private sector interest rates on the weighted average of those were about 6%, World Bank 5.3%, Chinese Development Banks about 5%. So it relatively lower cost. However, if you look at the growth rates over this period in emerging market and developing countries, they were only 4.4%. And so the Chinese loans, the private sector, and the World Bank were all providing lending lower than the growth rate, which is the big concern that gets encountered here, which causes these debt overhangs, which have now ballooned. Every study on Chinese development finance has shown that Chinese development finance has been significantly associated with economic growth in the global south, whereas private sector finance and MDB finance has not been associated with growth. The growth hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been structural transformation. It's largely been accentuating commodity-led growth. Initially, it was very carbon intensive, but then now they've banned overseas fossil fuel investments, and they're really moving towards green transformation. But it is growth. And in a conversation about debt, when most of your other debt is not generating growth, that's the big denominator that can balloon into debt overhangs. But despite these efforts, China has also provided the most debt relief thus far and has been an important voice for reforming the common framework. China's net transfers, however, to IDA countries fell from $2 billion in the positive in 2021 to now negative almost $6 billion in 2024, which is the most recent data that we have. That's in part because of COVID and other reasons on the domestic side that China's really reduced its lending. It's only about a little bit more than what the African Development Bank does every year. It's also part of function of debt distress in the global south, that they're scared to lend money to countries that aren't going to be able to pay back because of the debt distress that was caused by other factors. That being said, China was the leading participant in the service suspension initiative at the G20. And since 2020, it's provided upwards of $78 billion in bilateral debt relief through a mix of principal and deferred income schemes. And China's been a real productive critic of the common framework. Like the DRGR, China has been very critical of the debt sustainability analysis that goes into debt negotiations. Number two, it's been a big champion of what's called a fair comparability of treatment, making sure that those countries that charged very high interest rates, like the private sector, shouldn't be the ones that have to give the least amount of debt relief. They've also been a champion of compulsory participation by the private sector and real participation by the MDBs. That said, related to the other parts of the DRGR proposal, they haven't been interested in extending the common framework to middle-income countries in debt distress, nor in having a HIPC-like multi-country approach rather than the case-by-case approach, which really puts developing countries in a corner. And it hasn't necessarily been looking to seek the levels of debt relief that we have at the DRGR that not just put a country back to where it was right before COVID, which was barely moving along, but to provide the fiscal space to be able to make the stepwise increases in investments that are needed to meet our sustainable development goals, our Paris climate commitments, and avoid the catastrophic cost of climate change. So last point is that there's a real need for China to recharge its development finance and its debt relief. And we, in this paper, have a 5-point proposal there. And it's great to see that in Kenya and potentially now Ethiopia, some elements of this is something that we're starting to see. So number one, the Chinese interbank rate is almost at IDA rates. It's still hovering around 2%. And so one of the things that we do, we recommend with countries is to refinance existing loans, pushing out in countries that are facing debt distress. Number two, exchange those loans that are at risk of default for longer-term renminbi denominated loans, because the renminbi rate is so much lower. It'll lower the cost of capital, and by extending the maturity a long period of time, it'll open up a big amount of fiscal space to be able to invest in a green and inclusive recovery, and it would allow China to have more confidence in providing new long-term lending. And given interest rates right now, it would be practical to do that in renminbi for a green and inclusive recovery. Number four, however, there are some countries that have significant manufacturing capabilities, and it's important for China not to make the same miscalculations that they made in the West, that where Chinese green technologies really played a role in crowding out the competitiveness of some of those some of the sectors in Europe and the United States. And so for the countries like Brazil, South Africa, Cambodia, Pakistan that have manufacturing capabilities, not just debt relief and new loans to import Chinese technologies, but to engage in more foreign direct investment so that countries can share some of the access and benefit sharing of some of the employment and technology, so they too can have green industrialization the way China did. The fifth and last part of the proposal, however, is that China has to expand trade, especially imports from the global south, in renminbi. If they're going to renegotiate some of these deals in long-run renminbi and countries don't have renminbi, then countries will be in renminbi debt distress just the way they are in dollar debt distress now. So it's really important for China to provide export opportunities for countries in the global south in general, but also in renminbi for such a scheme to to work. And it's encouraging to see China moving in this direction. There was a deal with Kenya last year in October that did renegotiate Kenyan loans at a much longer maturity and converted them to renminbi with interest rate caps. So we think that that's important. It also gives fiscal space to Kenya, but it isn't coupled with any new trade arrangements or trade commitments in renminbi. And if you look at the most recent numbers, the Kenyan trade deficit with China is widening. So there's still work to do there to make sure that such deals are truly win-win for both sides. We know that China is negotiating with Ethiopia now, and perhaps they can learn the lessons from some of the Kenya deal to add some of these components. It's really important for China to do this. It opens market, new growth opportunities in the global south, given the fact that they've been shut out of the West. It helps alleviate the Chinese policy bank balance sheets and alleviate fiscal space in the host countries. It also facilitates China's broader goal of expanding renminbi internationalization and helping deal with China's overcapacity issues with green technologies on one side, but also major climate finance deficits in terms of the global south. And it supports green development cooperation and multilateralism, which is a big lack in the global system. Thanks so much, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. That was, a lot of very, very vital information. What is clear is that China plays a central role when we think about a new debt architectures and debt reform and debt relief. And the starting point is why China is so important, because it's one of the biggest lenders and absolutely vital for the global majority countries in terms not only of financing and refinancing their debts, but in their development models and their production capacities. And good news to hear the examples of Kenya and Ethiopia in a little shift in the way China is engaging. I really invite all of you to read the paper, and thank you, excellent as ever. Let me call on our last speaker today, Stephanie, and you have an incredible experience advising governments and international organizations in dealing with sovereign debt crises, starting with the Latin American debt crisis. So taking a broader historical perspective, How do you think international community's response to the sovereign debt crisis will be judged? In also from your own experience, Stephanie, which reforms do you regard as the most important and politically feasible for improving the fiscal leeway and that sustainability of developing economies? We heard from Mahmoud, he said our 11 proposals had to be practical and feasible. The same question to you, using your lifetime experience on these issues. Over to you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and thanks so much for the invitation. It's great to be with the group together again. And it's sad but nice to be able to remember Shamshad, who was such a wonderful person, as well as a wonderful economist and leader of thinking. I think maybe one thing to highlight, which hasn't been mentioned yet, is that she was a woman. And in many aspects, I think she was the first woman to have such senior roles, both in her country, Pakistan, and in international organizations. So it's very appropriate that we're remembering her and her sad death. In terms of your interesting question, I suppose I have the advantage of being a little bit older. In Chile, there is a saying that the devil knows more because he's old than because he's the devil. And so maybe experience does count a bit. I think the first lesson, which a range of writers, academics would agree, but also the countries that suffer this, is that the criteria is that always the resolutions of debt crisis have been too little, too late, and too lengthy. And that this has been at a cost of the debtor countries. In Latin America, in the 80s, it led to the well-known lost decade in Latin America. And in Africa, the delay for the HIPC measures was also even bigger. One thing that was already mentioned by Mahmoud briefly is the importance of, and by Penelope, was the importance of grouping debtor countries together in a forum. And there was an interesting experience in the Cartagena group, which put together these Latin American countries. Unfortunately, the creditors were always trying to break them up bilaterally, but it did perform a valuable role. And I think this forum that Penelope was telling about would play an important role. I think the other issue that has been raised by all the previous speakers, particularly Kevin, is the absolutely central role that growth has to play. And we would say growth, sustainable and inclusive growth, in the resolution of debt crisis. Because, for example, if you look at a very narrow financial perspective, you focus on trying to generate primary fiscal surpluses so countries can service the debt better in the future. But if you look at it from a broader growth and development perspective, you have to be very careful, because if you try and increase primary fiscal surpluses, at the same time you may be cutting back public investment, which also catalyzes private investment, which is essential for growth. And therefore you may be harming, if you like, the denominator, because it's debt servicing divided by GDP. My second point I wanted to make is that it's very important, I think, to think about debt relief in an integrated framework where you also think about new lending. Right? I would highlight probably particularly official international lending, especially from multilateral and regional development banks, together with debt restructure. And I think one should analyze very carefully the convenience of private flows, particularly for low-income and vulnerable countries, because private flows, talking more about portfolio flows and credit flows, not foreign direct investment, which can play a very positive way. And these first kind of flows tend to be very volatile, higher cost, as Kevin also mentioned, and also short term. And therefore, they may initially be very attractive because countries are hungry for financing development and the investment needed, but they can then more likely to devolve into debt crisis. And finally, on this point, a point that also Mahmoud mentioned is the role of domestic resource mobilization as part of the long-term solution. Because if you reduce reliance on external resources and through increasing domestic savings, as for example, successful Asian countries have done, and these savings are channeled efficiently to valuable investment, productive investment, this is a very important buffer as is development of domestic capital markets. And thirdly, I think it's looking at how countries should borrow responsibly. I think the first condition is that the conditions are appropriate. Long maturities, low and stable interest rates, and also flexibility of repayment in the face of shocks. And this group has done important work on, for example, Kevin and Uli and others on the state contingent clauses, like those applied by Barbados and many, which, for example, if there is a disaster, natural disaster, debt servicing can be frozen, and also lending can be increased. I think there's a lot more work to be done on this, including the promotion of GDP-linked bonds, commodity price-linked bonds, to shelter countries both from climate shocks and from other international shocks, like the terms of trade shocks. And in that, actually, we've gone a little bit backward because the IMF used to have a very nice compensatory financing facility, which was semi-automatic and which helped countries, particularly during shocks of commodity prices, but which sadly has now been abolished. So we need to recover some of these good ideas from the past. I think equally important is that this borrowing, external borrowing, should be channeled to productive investment so that it will encourage growth, particularly resilient, equitable growth, and sustainable, both in macroeconomic terms, but also in climate change terms. And this link with looking at how the resources are channeled towards investment is absolutely key. And thirdly, I think if you are borrowing in external resources, a significant part of that new investment should be in tradables, either for exports or for import substitution, because you need to generate sufficient foreign exchange to service the debt in the future without harming future growth. So you have to look at this sustainability and growth.
Well, I think we lost Stephanie, did we? Hello?
Yeah, at least she's not on the webinar anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry, because yeah, it was such an incredible way to close the panel and the very important recommendations, very specific and important recommendations that she made, especially looking at the issues of quality, inclusiveness, of growth, quality of investment, the role of domestic resource mobilization, and this integrated framework with debt relief together with new conditions for lending, especially from multilateral banks, and so many other things. I don't have time to provide you a summary with the incredible ways of closing the panel section. I think that all the inputs were absolutely excellent. I see a few questions. perhaps we still have time for like 1 minute or less responses from the panelists. I see the question from Elise Cooper from Jubilee, Germany, asking about the borrowers platform, who basically questions about who will be members of the borrowers platform. How did you resolve the question of whether countries that are both borrowers and lenders can also become members? That question very quickly, Penelope, for you, and perhaps for Mahmoud, could you please clarify how the borrowers platform is different from the borrowers club? I think basically we're speaking about the same thing, but perhaps you can add a few thoughts there.
Thank you.
Mahmoud,
So perhaps I can just jump in there.
Excuse me?
So shall I just jump in there on that first
yes,
question?
Please.
Yes,
please
great.
Go ahead. I was just reading out the questions.
Thank you so
to
much.
give you the chance for a 1-minute response, and if someone else wants to add something from the panel members, because we are running out of time and we still to listen to very important closing remarks from the DRGR co-chair. So go ahead, Penelope.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the question. Yes, I think the point is that, of course, we are looking here at net borrowers. So we assume that many countries have some little credit exposure, such as countries who have used their public development bank to support a neighbor and so on. But for the vast majority of developing countries, these are they are net borrowers. Most of the exposure is borrowing rather than creditor. May I just make one comment? Several times the Cartagena Club was invoked here. I want to make us very clear that's not what we're trying to do with the borrowers platform. That was clearly a failure, and that's not what we would like to emulate. We would like to do something completely different. The key difference is that Cartagena Club was brought together of countries in distress and in crisis. This is a sustainable platform for borrowers to work together for many decades to come. In 40 years' time, I hope they'll be able to say it was launched in 2026. And we'll look back and say it was much later than the Paris Club, but it's still sustained. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Penelope. Would you like to add something, Mahmoud, before I turn to also Kevin, because you have a question about China providing the most debt relief. So debt relief or debt suspension or rescheduling. Some clarification there, but let me go to Mahmoud first if you want to add something on the Debtors Club or Debtors platform.
Yeah, sure. Well, countries, when they join these clubs and platforms or forum, they come with different background, initial conditions, and expectations. Some would come for sharing knowledge. Some would come for technical assistance, other for coordinating positions at the international financial institutions. Many of these countries are already in debt crisis, so we cannot ignore the role of such platforms in dealing with countries in debt distress. In discussion that I had with the chair of the group behind the work of the Borrowers Club, which happens to be Egypt, just a couple of days ago, they say, well, for contribution to sustain this club, we are happy to do more and more to support it. We are a country that is spending such and such on daily basis for expensive debt service. So if through this engagement with the Debt Forum and with the Borrowers Club, that we can really have better understanding and better positioning and to seek more effective, more efficient and fair ways in dealing with debt problems, we are part of it. So we need really to consider that this is very much not supply driven. It's benefiting from all of the attempts that unfortunately many of them happen during crises, including actually this one that we are trying to establish the Borrowers Club, while many countries are suffering from debt crisis, and this is one of the motivations of them to join such clubs. Of course, for them to serve the purpose of putting debt within the finance framework, to put debt within the how to better invest for growth and development. This is actually the kind of political economy advice and the policy advice and institutional reforms that they require. We look forward to the technical paper and the launching of the borrowers platform or club, and which will have then a formal name as will be agreed with the member states.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to close this Q&A section, let me turn quickly to Kevin about China. Is it relief, suspension, rescheduling? I think all of the above, but you have the floor for 1 minute before we close this seminar.
Yeah, sure. Very quickly, I put a link in the chat for everyone to a report by the Rhodium Group that tries to tally all of the bilateral debt relief. Yeah, and some of it's been suspension, some of it's been reductions in principal, some of it's been outright composition, and that's the one of the most recent studies that really outlines the distribution of it. I guess I'd just say, to take one step back, is that we are in a crisis here, and that we really need three things. We need a stepwise increase of new financing. And as Stephanie Griffith-Jones says, that largely needs to be led by public finance through MDBs and national development banks. Number two, it has to be high quality investment, right? It has to generate economic growth that is green and inclusive, to use the words of the DRGR group. And unfortunately, as I noted before, the evidence on MDB financing isn't even causing growth, let alone the transformation. And whereas China's is causing growth, it's not exactly the growth path that we all want to be on in the 21st century. So not only do we need to reform these institutions to make them bigger, but we need to make them much better. But whether we like it or not, there's a number of countries that regardless, they can't absorb the new financing, and that they will need debt release and more fiscal space to be able to absorb the new financing. And even though that the multilateral system is retreating on that, we need more voices in the spirit of Shamshad Akhtar to make sure that we continue to bring an empirical and an evidence-based picture to this, while this conversation is getting increasingly politicized and leaving the global south behind. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. And before we now come to an end of this event, there is one very important announcement that my colleague Jörg has, who is also the DRGR co-chair and head of the Globalization and Transformation Division at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, would like to make. So please, Jörg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria Fernanda. And good afternoon, everyone. As we bring this webinar to a close, I want to take a moment to reflect on the journey we have shared together with the Debt Relief for a Green and Inclusive Recovery Project, in short, DRGR. Since its beginning in the summer of 2020, it has been a beacon of collaboration, political and intellectual creativity, bringing together people from across the globe to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time, the debt crisis and how it relates to climate, nature, and inequality. Today, however, I must share with you that the DRGR project will be concluding its activities. While this marks the end of a chapter, it is also an opportunity to celebrate the impact we have made together and to express our deepest gratitude to all who have contributed to this vital work. First and foremost, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the former and current co-chairs of DRGR, most of them here in this room, with Shamshad Akhtar sorely missing. Your political leadership, network, and unwavering commitment has been essential for our collective achievements. Thank you for your tireless efforts and for guiding us with such wisdom and passion. I want also to express my sincere appreciation to our institutional partners, the Center for Sustainable Finance at SOAS University of London, led by Uli Volz, and until a bit more than a year ago, also the Global Development Policy Center at Boston University, led by Kevin Gallagher, both with their respective teams. Your collaboration has been essential to give the project the intellectual and analytical heft that was decisive for its impact. Your willingness to work together seamlessly across organizations have been invaluable. A special thanks goes to my incredible team at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, in particular Sarah Ribbert and Christina Rode. Your expertise and relentless hard work have kept the project together and driven it forward. You have managed the day-to-day operations with exceptional skill and dedication, so I'm really grateful for your commitment. While the DRGR project may be concluding, the conversations we have started and the relationships we have built will continue. The need for debt relief to enable climate action and an inclusive recovery remains as urgent as ever, as we heard today. I encourage each of you to carry forward the ideas and connections from this initiative into your ongoing work. In closing, I want to leave you with a sense of gratitude and hope. We have achieved much together, and there's still so much more to do. So let's continue to work for a world where excessive debt does not stand in the way of a green and inclusive future for all. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Jörg, and what a good way to end this webinar and basically following the words of dear Shamshad. We need to continue with the struggle from our respective spaces and the places and the connections. So it's been a great journey and to be continued. So thank you very much to all. Friends and partners, to the incredible team and the Secretariat, Jörg and Sarah. Thank you. It's been an incredible, as I said, incredible journey. And I hope that we contributed to the global and much needed debate on debt relief for green and inclusive recovery. Thank you so much. And I think that we have a little small internal debriefing in our team. So you're free to go now. And once again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.